What's up, y'all? My name is Vocab, Malone, Street Apologist. You're about to see me interact with a video with GMS Cleveland. That's a Hebrew Israelite group. And in this conversation, they bring up Ephesians chapter 2. And they give an improper interpretation, and I'd like to give the proper interpretation here today. So let's break it down. Check it out.
Recognize Christ broke down the middle wall between Jew and Gentile. You need to recognize that.
Right.
So you don't want to deal with Ephesians 2? Shouldn't have brought it up. Can't deal with it.
In Ephesians the 2nd chapter, talk about how Yahweh broke down that middle wall of partition. That's right. Right. Real quick.
I've been listening for quite some time here, and you notice that's why I wanted to jump in. And when they brought up Ephesians 2, I said, hey, I'm going to get in. And he's like, well, no, not yet. Let him finish.
Well, that's a great point. Between Jew and Gentile. Yeah, I said I was going to jump in. Sorry. Gotta jump in after this one.
So he begins by referencing Ephesians 2:14. So peace is important to understand. This is a harmonious relationship. And the two groups in view are obviously Jew and Gentile. I'm going to read more of the context to show you that. Notice there that Jesus Christ is our peace, not law keeping or anything like that. And also notice that it says he's made us both one. So two groups are in view. Fascinating. And it says that he broke down in his flesh. So this is something he did by his death on the cross, the dividing wall of hostility. Well, let's look at more of the context. The dividing wall is an interesting metaphor that's employed here because on the outer courtyard of the Jerusalem temple, there was a warning to Gentiles that they would basically have themselves to blame for their death if they passed beyond it into the inner courts. So there's an inscription that reads on a literal dividing wall separating where the Gentiles can go and where the Jews can go. And so there's an allusion to this wall here within the Pauline writings, and it perfectly illustrates Christ's reconciliation of all people into a new humanity. Now, when Hebrew Israelites hear this, they'll say, well, it can't be reconciled because the Jews and Gentiles were never together. So how was it reconciliation? Well, that's not the only definition or understanding of reconciliation. A simple definition for reconcile means to bring two parties into peaceful relations. Let's go on and continue to look at what he says here.
Corinthians chapter 5 verse 17. Therefore, if any man be in Hamashiach, he is a new creature. Old things are passed away. Behold, all things are become new. Anyway, you have to relearn righteousness. But the way that Yahweh taught it, man. Okay? You have to relearn righteousness according to the doctrine that Yahweh preached when he was here on earth.
Well, the place they went to then was 2 Corinthians 5:17. And now that's not the topic of today, but we can briefly turn there because even the breakdown he gives of it is not correct. There's a common theme of reconcile there, but notice how this is about humankind to God there. And if you go back up to verse 16, this is fascinating too. From now on, therefore, we regard no one according to the flesh, even though we once regarded Christ according to the flesh. We regard him thus no longer. And then the next verse is what they're talking about. Well, look at that. It says we don't regard anyone according to the flesh. The Hebrew Israelites, that's what they're doing, regarding people according to the flesh. So, you know, when you read these verses around that they're reading, they just don't work with their theology. But he's talking about you got to learn new things and unlearn things. That's not what being a new creation is. This has to do with being born again, like Jesus spoke to Nicodemus. This is something brand new. This is not, it's not about learning new laws and commandments and statutes or something like that. That's not what this is about. This is about having a new heart. Your inner man is literally transformed. Who you are from the core inside out. That's what this is talking about. And there's some relation to Ephesians 2, but I don't want to spend too much time on this, even though it's a great passage in and of itself. Let's continue back over to Ephesians 2.
All right, so
The old
you
things
mentioned,
will be the old man, the things that you used to do, the person used to be, all that shit passes away, man.
yeah. So he mentioned how Christ broke down the middle wall separation, right?
We're not dealing with you.
Well, I'm here. I'm not going to go anywhere, so might as well. Okay, well, I guess we're going to escalate already then, brothers. So you mentioned how Jesus Christ broke down the middle wall of separation, right? And that's true in Ephesians 2. That was a good verse he brought out. Ephesians 2, that's a good verse. So I'm just going to continue on you. I'm going to land back on you, all right? From Ephesians 2. You've been going on. 1 Peter 3:15 says, be prepared to give an answer. I know you're not used to answering questions. You might as well stay in your house if you can't answer a question. Just do a GMS sit down. But here's a question from the Word. This says in Ephesians chapter 2, remember the formerly you, the Gentiles in the flesh, who were, why would the demon read the Bible? You're the one who read the Bible. Who were called uncircumcision by the so-called circumcision, which is performed in the flesh by human hands.
So notice I start reading from the top, Ephesians 2:11. Therefore remember that at one time you Gentiles in the flesh. Now how else would you refer to Gentiles in the flesh? They're going to try to say, these one-Westers, that these are Israelites. How are you going to say that Gentiles in the flesh actually means Israelites? It says Gentiles in the flesh. How else would you describe them? Called the uncircumcision by what is called the circumcision. Uncircumcised and uncircumcision, those are sort of slurs. You see David use that against Goliath, for example, which is made in the flesh by hands.
Remember that you were one time without Christ.
Verse 12, remember that you, so he's talking to Gentiles, were at that time separated from Christ, alienated from the commonwealth of Israel. So these are clearly not Israelites, and strangers to the covenants of promise, having no hope and without God in the world. Fascinating, 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 isn't it? Now, I want to read a verse, or I'm going to read from this. This is not really a scholarly dictionary, the compact Bible dictionary put out by Zondervan, but since Hebrew Israelites use it so much, I sometimes use it against them. And this is an example. I'm going to read the definitions for strangers here, because it's not going to be Israelites. Listen to this. This is the second and third. You can read all three, but the entry gets longer. Here's what stranger is, according to this. Foreigner who did not have cultist fellowship with Israel. That means they didn't participate in the worship. Or people entirely different from or even hostile to Israel. That's how stranger is defined in the Zondervan Compact Bible Dictionary. Now, how are they going to spin that and twist that?
Alienated from the citizenship of Israel and strangers to the covenants of promise, having no hope or without God in the world.
Let's look now at a little more expansive Zondervan's Pictorial Bible Dictionary. And I'm going to go here to the entry for Gentile. Separation between Jew and Gentile became more strict until the New Testament period. The hostility is complete. So hear that word, hostility? Persecution embittered the Jew, and he retaliated by hatred of everything Gentile, and by avoidance, so far as was possible, of contact with Gentiles. The intensity of this feeling varied, and gave way before unusual kindness. And then they give the example of Luke chapter 7, verses 4 and 5 there. And that's just part of the definition from Gentile, which is the Greek word ethnos, which in Hebrew would be goy, but here it's ethnos. Okay, so when you put all this together, this is clearly talking about Gentiles and Jews. Now, I'm going to continue in reading this, okay? I want you to see this very carefully. Verse 13. But now in Christ Jesus, you who were once far off have been brought near by the blood of Christ, for he himself is our peace, who has made us both one, has broken down in his flesh the dividing wall of hostility, by abolishing the law of commandments expressed in ordinances, that he might create in himself one new man in place of the two, so making peace, and might reconcile us both to God in one body through the cross, thereby killing the hostility. Now, let's also look up in the Holman's Bible Dictionary, more expansive yet, this term alien, because this is used in here. Very simple. Alien, a foreigner living in a community without relatives. An alien stood between a person born in the community and a foreigner without any ties to the community, because aliens could become soldiers and things like that, and they give examples. Okay, So this is not talking about North and South Israel, okay? It's clearly not.
Now here's my question. Ephesians 2 says, I'm just lambacking on what you said. You said he broke down the middle wall between Jew and Gentile. So why don't you go all the way and recognize Christ broke down the middle wall between Jew and Gentile? You need to recognize that.
As a branch. Right.
So you don't want to deal with Ephesians 2? Shouldn't have brought it up. Can't deal with it.
Ephesians chapter 2, verse 17. And he came and preached peace to you who were far off, and peace to those who were near. For through him we both have access in one spirit to the Father. Notice we both. He's talking about two different groups there. Paul, the author of Ephesians chapter 2, being a Jew, talking about Gentiles. So then you are no longer strangers and aliens. So this is the past condition. But you are fellow citizens with the saints and members of the household of God, built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Christ Jesus himself being the cornerstone, in whom the whole structure being joined together grows into a holy temple in the Lord. In him you also are being built together into a dwelling place for God by the Spirit. So aliens are non-citizens who would dwell in, say, a city, and they would have some privileges as neighbors, but they weren't citizens who had full protections and rights of a city. This is more in the Greco-Roman context. But strangers were complete foreigners with no rights or privileges. And so when we look at these definitions and what they mean, we understand this is not talking about all Israelites. None of this would make sense if that was the case. Now, I jumped in because I wanted to make sure I read Ephesians 2 to them. Unfortunately, they did not answer anything from Ephesians 2. They just went on to the next thing. But I wanted you guys to benefit from it, so check this out.
Jew and Gentile. You need to recognize that. So you don't want to deal with Ephesians 2? Shouldn't have brought it up. Can't deal with it.
Somebody explain they are burned.